Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is how to pick your project, preparing for an audiovisual digitization project. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Biz Gallo, and I am the statewide digitization initiatives coordinator for the Library of Michigan. And my job in this role is to help libraries, cultural heritage organizations, and their staff digitize their materials, provide access to them, and digitally preserve them over time. Now, to do this, last year we did our Digitization Basics webinar series. This was a 9-part series that is available on the Library of Michigan's YouTube channel, also in our webinar archives. I'll drop a link to this in the chat in a second. But this year we've been investigating some topics that are a little heavier and require a little bit more depth to explore them, which is why I am so very grateful to have Sarah Mainville here today with me. And she is the Media Preservation Librarian at Michigan State University Libraries. I'm going to go over just a brief bit of housekeeping, and then we will go ahead and get started. So just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded, so if you would like to go back and visit again later, you can do that. It'll take about a week in order to get the webinar captioned, but you will also, for those of you who've registered for this webinar, you'll get a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording when it's available. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Sarah's going to talk for about 45 minutes, so you can feel free to drop your questions in the chat or save them to the end. We'll make sure that they get answered if there's time. If you have any technical issues with audio or anything like that, please feel free to chat Becky in the Zoom chat, and she can help you resolve those issues. And last, if you are looking for additional resources on digitization or digital collections resources, there's a lot more available on the Library of Michigan's website, which is michigan.gov/lmdigitization. I will drop these links in the chat as well. That is all I have. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Viz. So my name is Sarah Mainville. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am, as Biz said, the Media Preservation Librarian at Michigan State University Libraries. And I've been in this position for over 5 years, with over 10 years of experience in AV preservation. In my role at MSU, I lead a small team of audiovisual preservation specialists. We have an internal digitization lab where we do transfers in addition to preservation activities like rehousing and remediations. I'm the project manager for all of our in-house and vendor digitization projects, managing our budget, logistics, communicating with our vendor, and so on. I also act as a media preservation consultant for the library, as well as MSU's community at large. I want to take a moment and draw people's attention to one of the motivators for me to discuss AV preservation today. Later this week, on October 27th, is the World Day for Audiovisual Heritage, which celebrates the importance of AV in the recording of our collective memory, as well as educating the public on the vulnerability of AV formats for long-term stewardship. This is a UNESCO World Day event, and there are many more. So if you're interested about the day and want to learn about all the activities that are happening around the world, I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and so you feel free to look at it when you have time. In this session, you'll learn to correctly identify and describe audiovisual media in your collection, how to scope your project so that you stay on target with what your project is supposed to be, and explore different avenues of funding audiovisual digitization projects. Before we start with the bulk of the content, I kind of want to get a sense for where everyone is coming from. So if you could take a moment to answer these 2 questions by dropping them in the chat, that would be really helpful. And I'll read them in case. So the first question is, how many of you have audiovisual materials in your collection? And if you could estimate the amount. And then number 2, how many of you feel confident in handling the AV in those collections? Okay, so we're seeing someone with over 1,000 about media objects, too many in the 10,000s. Okay. Not sure exact amount, but noteworthy breadth of material types, somewhat confident in the ability to handle them. Okay, I'll give a couple more. Approximately 6 million feet. Whoa. Okay. About 2,000. All right. So it's not small change. That helps me understand. Thank you. We have quite a large AV for our size library, somewhat confident, mildly confident. All right. Pretty comfortable. Great. Okay. So now I know. And we have one more question that I would like you to try and answer is like, what factors impact your ability to do digitization projects on this AV? And I gave some examples, right? Time, money, expertise, institutional support, but I'm sure there are others. So see, money and time. Yes, age old. Money, expertise, time, money, lack of info on copyright. Yes, thank you. That's a great one. We're not going to really touch on copyright today. That's like not really my wheelhouse. Time, definitely. Okay. Well, money. I think time, we'll see what we can do. We'll at least provide some more efficient ways of doing things. And money we'll kind of get to toward the end of this. I'm going to move on. So the first chapter of our discussion is learning how to correctly identify and describe your assets. This is the first step you should take so that you can properly scope your project. As I will get to in a minute, the information collected at this stage will influence which preservation actions you take and when you will do them. And this is an essential part of a successful project. Knowing what you have and the condition it is in can direct limited funds to neat items that need it the most or that are hidden gems in your institution's collection. Spending the time to go through the items and record any information from the items, such as the original format, title, record date, duration, and so on, not only will give you the ability to make informed decisions, but it may also provide opportunities to partnership in the preservation or digitization of that material. Audiovisual materials have been around for over 100 years. So there are many different formats used for consumers and also industry. This makes the preservation of these items more complicated than, say, paper-based items. And the first step of this journey, it begins with proper identification of the media format. Because different formats have unique needs and preservation priorities and the cost of transfer. Taking the time to accurately identify the items in your collection will help you realistically plan for their long-term care. If you know that you have a 16 millimeter cellulose acetate with a magstripe audio track, this will need to be cared for differently than, say, a 35 millimeter nitrate print. Additionally, the ability to digitize and the cost of that digitization differs by the format and its duration. So just blanketly stating something as film doesn't really help you in this situation. Here we have different media formats. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but it is merely to illustrate the variety that you may encounter when you're going through your collections. So with all these different formats, how can you know the difference between an open reel audio tape and an open reel video? That's where I can help. Since there isn't enough time today to discuss many of the different aspects of these media formats and their specific preservation needs and risks, I would like to teach you how to find this information for yourself when you're back at your institutions. But before we get deep into this topic, I think it would be helpful to be sure that we're all on the same page when we use specific words. First, I would like to stress that in the field of AV preservation, film and video are not interchangeable. Film is often either confused with video or erroneously used as a blanket term for moving image media. But film is not the same as video and works very differently. There are some easily identifiable identifiable differences between film and video. First, film is a series of still photographs on a plastic base. Film works by creating an illusion of movement when frames are shown through a projector in rapid succession. Before you even get to looking at the film, you'll notice how it's stored. Film is often stored in a round metal or plastic container called a can. Once you open the can, you can see that it's either stored on a metal reel or a plastic core. Wound around the reel or core is the film, which is flexible plastic that will have sprocket holes or perforations or perfs. Sprocket holes are the holes on the one or both edges of the film that a projector uses to move the film forward, so it's a quick indicator that you have film. Microfilm looks similar, but does not have sprocket holes. Additionally, if you can look at the content of this, microfilm will have distinct images that are very different from one frame to the next. Last, film has visible frames, meaning if you unwind the film, you should be able to see the content with the naked eye. Video is typically magnetic tape, either brown or black, with no visible content on that tape. And you can see the image that I've included on this slide. The top is an example or a drawing of film and the bottom of video. Video is found in either a plastic cartridge like VHS or an open reel, which were often the broadcasting formats. Next, we're going to discuss film gauge, and that is how we refer to the width of the film. It's also one of the easiest features of film to identify. A film gauge can tell us a lot about it, its age, what it's made of, possible use and content, whether or not it has sound or more. Each film gauge has its own corresponding equipment that works for its specific type. So being able to identify a film's gauge will help you find the right equipment to manage it. There are some common formats that you're likely to find if you have film in your collection, such as 35 millimeters, 16 millimeter, regular 8, and Super 8 films, as well as some uncommon formats like Super 16, 28 millimeter, and 9.5 millimeter. These uncommon formats were found mostly in Europe, and so we're not really going to talk about those today. 35 millimeter was the first gauge introduced and was commonly used for theatrical screenings and professional use, and it's still used today. If you're looking to identify 35 millimeter film, you can take out a ruler and measure its width. You can also look at its perforations. It will have 4 perfs per frame on both sides of the film. The other gauges, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter, and Super 8, were all developed for consumer use. The equipment and film for these gauges were smaller and less expensive, making them both popular for home use and for amateur, experimental, and documentary filmmakers. 16 millimeter is half the width of 35 millimeter with perfs on one or both sides of the frame. 8 millimeter and Super 8 are the same size, half the size of 16 millimeter, and have perfs on only one side. You'll notice in the illustration on this slide that Super 8 has smaller perforations, which allow for a larger frame size. Okay, next we're going to discuss what a carrier is. The carrier is how we describe the physical anatomy of the format. Think about it as what is carrying the information or content of your media object. There are mechanical carriers, magnetic carriers, optical carriers, and solid state carriers, as defined by the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. So, for example, we have in this slide a picture of a compact cassette. The carrier is magnetic tape within a plastic cartridge, and this would be classified as a magnetic carrier. The other image is of a wax cylinder, and this is considered a mechanical carrier. Early audio formats were often defined as mechanical carriers because of the way that the needle actually runs across the grooves of the media to read it. Next, we're going to discuss the base, and I've referred to this a few times already in this. And what we mean by that is you see the image here, and you see that the middle layer is called the base layer. And this image gets to the heart of what we mean when we use that term. It is the material that is holding the shape of the media, sort of like a support. So in this example of magnetic tape, the base layer can be made up of paper, PVC, acetate, or polyester. When we refer to nitrate or polyester film, that is often shorthand for the base material of that item. The same is true when we talk about open reel audio being acetate or polyester. We're referring to that base layer composition. Next word we would often use is binder, also found in this picture. A binder is the matter that binds the information to the base. It's mixed in as part of the information layer of the medium. In the case of magnetic tape, it adheres the magnetic particles, which hold the information that the head of the playback machine reads, to the base. Depending on the binder and the storage environment, binders can degrade rapidly, particularly if the binder is made of organic material. So if we look at this image again, you'll notice that the binding layer on the top holding the magnetic particles to the base layer. So these are some fundamental vocabulary that often get used when talking about preservation around AV material. And I want to be sure that we all had a basic understanding of what these terms meant. So let's dig in. Without years of experience handling these items, how can you be expected to accurately identify media beyond the more common consumer formats of VHS, cassette tapes, and CDs? The Flemish Institute for Archives has created an online tool that can help you weed through the possibilities with a decision tree. This interactive website called Know Your Carrier helps you decide what format your media is by using images to describe the item, which call out a distinctive characteristics such as perforations. This website just helps you get to a very broad place in identification. I recommend this resource for people who have not worked with AV materials before, but it shouldn't be the only place you look for information. There are many variants of formats, even within broader things like VHS, CDs, 16 millimeter film. This website doesn't get into those variants and within the umbrella category of motion picture film. I want to impress upon all of you that these distinctions are important and in the need to recognize them and note them, because there are very different and important distinctions between cellulose acetate and cellulose nitrate film, just to name an example. In one case, you want, in the case of acetate, you want an inert plastic vented can for storage. And in the other, you want a metal closed can for proper storage. Even though they may be both 35 millimeter film, the need and subsequent care that they receive are very different. Just as there are important differences between acetate or polyester-based open reel audio tapes. One you can bake if you need to because it has sticky shed. The other you cannot bake, and you should never do. So knowing and notating these distinctions is extremely important. So how could you conduct preservation activities on these items are dictated by the chemical compositions of the carriers. Thus, it's very important to turn to a resource such as the Preservation Self-Assessment Program from the University of Illinois Library. This resource has been a consistent source of information on preservation, particularly around audiovisual material. I find this one particularly helpful once you have a basic understanding of your format. You can look up the particular information about that format type, such as date range when it was used, description of the format, and the risk level. To be able to have a single resource which displays all the information that has been invaluable for practitioners in this field. I will have a link to this at the end of my slides, so don't have to scramble to get the website. This is an example of an entry in that website. It's for 9.5 millimeter film. And you have some reference images you'll notice the circle eye underneath. And if you hover over those, it'll give you a more in-depth description on what you're seeing. And then it succinctly lists many of the format attributes and issues that one would need to know in order to make an informed preservation decision. After you have properly identified the item, what are you going to do with that information, besides feeling very good about yourself? The next step of the process is to record that information somewhere so that you can have a record of it with any other connecting information. In this section, we're going to discuss some effective and low barrier ways to create these records, as well as what fields to collect. It's very important to have a general idea of what you will be doing with this information. Are you collecting it for digitization? Are you looking at the items to see what the condition they are in? Knowing this information ahead of time will guide you in determining which fields are necessary to collect. Without getting too much into archival practice of description and arrangement, as that is not my background, I want to discuss the importance of thorough description and provide areas of direction in case those are of you who are working with an institution that haven't decided how to handle AV material. Quality description can increase the possibility of future users finding the material and using it. Additionally, metadata that you record during the inventory can provide a useful context for the digital file once the physical carrier has gone away. It is important to consider who might be using your collections and for what purpose. These questions can guide you in your work, and if you are going to do this work for use beyond yourself or a family unit, you should consider adopting a standard of metadata description. Are you using a specific standard at your institution? Or better yet, will you be planning to put these materials in a repository that requires a specific metadata standard? It is best to work within the framework of those standards from the outset, rather than trying to shoehorn them in after the fact. At the very least, you should determine which fields you should be collecting and whether they have controlled vocabularies within them. Are there fields that you want to collect but are not represented? What are those? These questions should be addressed before any sort of actual inventory begins. At this stage, it would be beneficial to consider the questions: who might be using this collection? What might they be using it for? How will they look for it? Creating some primary use cases can help you determine the level of description and the fields you are collecting data for as well. You may not be able to foresee all the cases that your collection could be used for, but having a few significant cases can help frame your work. One of the backbones of description is using controlled vocabularies. I've highlighted 4 areas which I would say are essential to use a controlled vocabulary, whether that uses one of the metadata schemas or formatting or wording, or if you decide on one internally. It's important to be consistent and to document your choices so that people inheriting your work or collections in the future understand the choices you made. So starting with the first one, format. As I went over in identifying the proper format, it's important that you record this properly. You put in all that hard work to determine what that format is. Wouldn't it be a shame to lose it over time due to a vague term like videotape? Adopting vocabularies used by other institutions, like in metadata standards, would be wise, as that increases the likelihood of your collection having a more secure future and being used in other situations. Also, your time is precious. Don't use it trying to create another controlled vocabulary when there are suitable ones at your disposal. The next one is duration. Not only is it important to note the duration, even if it's a potential duration of what the media format can hold, this provides digitization estimates. It's also crucial to adopt a consistent way to record the duration. I would highly recommend keeping the field as a number so that you can calculate totals. The format that I have listed of hour, minute, seconds is widely used in the field. And these are typically 2 digits in those fields. So you would be in great company if you use this format. Please remember that when you're doing film inventories, duration is typically calculated in feet, because depending on the frames per second, the duration could be different. I will be sharing a template in the next slide that has some information on how you can turn those footage into durations if you know what your frame per second is. This can help you make a measurement and then calculate that into duration if you are using 25 or 24 frames per second, which is very common in film. And then that can allow you to create storage space estimates before you can begin digitization projects, because film tends to be very large digital files, which really eats up your storage space quickly. The next field is date. In a former life, dealing with inconsistent date fields was the bane of my existence and business as well. So in order to maintain order and consistency in this field, I suggest adopting the international standard format of a 4-digit year, dash a 2-digit month, dash 2-digit day. And you can use these either with or without dashes. Just be consistent. Not only will this help you keep your data tidy, it will also can be used and embedded in your files later if that is something that you decide to do. Decide on how you will consistently document no date. Do you leave that field blank? Do you put on there undated or date unknown? The idea is you make a policy around how you handle that situation and you keep doing the same thing consistently over time. The last one is condition assessment. This field requires a bit more expertise than the others because you need to be able to recognize issues within the format. However, there is lots of information out there in the world about different ailments that media formats have. The example I have here is vinegar syndrome, which is something that cellulose acetate film tends to get, and sometimes open reel audio as well. And it's where the deterioration creates a strong vinegar scent. It's one of the most easily recognizable ones because once you smell that, you will never forget it. The goal of having a consistent condition assessment is if you are having to do a search across your collection for anything that has mold, if you know what you call that, you can do a find and get everything in your results. If you're using different ways of describing mold, then you're going to have to do a lot more finds, and then you're going to have to kind of piecemeal it all together. And you may never be sure that you had everything that it has that issue. The goal here is to be able to target items that might cause issues when it comes time to transfer them, or which might cause harm to other items in the collection. So here's a screen grab of an inventory template that I created with BizGallo. We created this template in order to provide people new to this type of project with basic fields to guide them in their inventory. At the bottom of the sheet, you will find 4 tabs. The first 3 correspond to basic categories of media format. Each tab is tailored for the collection of data suited to that format type. The 4th tab lists the different controlled vocabularies needed while doing metadata collection, such as formats, condition assessment, speed, and so on. This is meant to be a manageable and pared down template. There may be circumstances that require additional fields, such as copyright statements, access statements, and so on. Consider our template to be the starter package that can be adapted to your collection's specific needs. The red columns are required, particularly if you will be pursuing digitization or reformatting of these materials. And again, this will be at the end of my slides, so you can get that and look at it. You will need to make a copy of this because it is only, it's view only right now when you have access. On some of these pages, there will be comments to help you understand the meaning behind the column. But if there are any questions regarding the different columns, please feel free to reach out to me. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few metadata fields that are required if you're going to do a digitization project. Unique ID is used to tie your physical item to the digital record. One of the most important aspects to creating identifiers for your material is making sure that it is unique. This uniqueness is expanded beyond the box that it is in to include your entire collection, maybe across your collections. Please avoid calling an object tape 01 in any collection that includes tapes, because once these tapes are digitized, if you use that physical identifier in the file name, you may have a more difficult time maintaining its uniqueness, let alone the context for which the file was made. That being said, try to keep your ID under 45 characters. This will ensure that once in a digital environment, your identifier will be easily read. Not to mention, most operating systems have a character limit, which is much larger than 45 characters. But machine reading and human reading have different needs and serve different purposes. So, in order to ensure that your identifiers are stable in the future, consider how many objects might be in the collection. If you're using a numbering system based on the quantity of objects, it is sound practice to have leading zeros in those numbers. So rather than tape numerical 1, use tape 001. Depending on the size, you may want 2 leading zeros or more. My last tip is to, again, look into the foreseeable future in order to future-proof your collections. I understand that you can't anticipate everything, but there are decisions you make today that will make your digital collections, which most AV collections become, more sustainable to steward. So craft your unique identifiers so that they are simultaneously human and machine readable. What this means is that include elements in the identifier that will assist humans in understanding what it is they're looking at, but follow rules that will allow the files to move through a computing environment with minimal issues, such as avoiding illegal characters and no white spaces. The next field is format. This is needed so that you know what type of playback equipment you may need if you're trying to do the digitization in-house. Or if you're sending the material to a vendor, this will dictate how much the digitization will cost. Some formats have a higher priority level in terms of reformatting than others. The duration, the last field I've included here, is needed particularly for vendored projects because the cost is tied to the format and the duration. The longer the items are, the more expensive it costs to digitize. This is due to the fact that many of these formats must be digitized in real time. So a 90-minute cassette will take 90 minutes to capture, and then all the subsequent work. So the next section, I will cover the benefits of a well-defined project and the steps you can take to complete your preservation action plan. A successful project doesn't just happen. A lot of time, energy, and effort go into managing it. When faced with the overwhelming task of preserving audiovisual collections with few resources, it's critical to articulate one's goals, values, partners, and priorities so that these can function as a guide. As I will get into shortly, an essential element of this is recognizing your limitations and barriers. A plan that respects these boundaries is much more likely to have the outcomes you want. Pairing the capacity of your organization with your preservation needs is an important next step. This guides which funding opportunities you should pursue. For example, if you need funding for digitization, that might be a big lump sum, but it only needs to be a one-time funding. However, for long-term digital preservation storage, there's a sustainability issue that would need to be addressed in order to ensure its longevity. This type of insight can guide you to the right solutions for your needs. Not only will your preservation needs guide the search for the proper type of funding, it also creates clear boundaries for the stakeholders' expectations. Simply outlining the needs of your organization or collection gets everyone involved on the same page for the proper course of action. This is particularly important for the folks that are not involved in the day-to-day operations. It also allows for a multi-step process that follows a clear plan of action. Does your collection require a needs assessment? This should come at the start of the project, not after you've digitized everything. So getting all the needs out there on the table for all the partners is detrimental for this to be accurate. Once you understand your needs, it's time for the fun part. Look into the future and see where you can go and what you hope this project brings. What do you hope to do with your digitized content? Will it become part of a larger project or repository? Will it be used in an exhibit? All these potential outcomes will change the course you take. This is where a preservation plan can be of assistance. A preservation plan is a process by which the general and specific needs for the care of collections are determined. Priorities are established and resources for implementation are identified. A preservation plan should be flexible and highly customizable to the individual or institution that its creation is viewed as a necessity and not a burden. The first step in creating a preservation plan is to define the goal of one's preservation efforts. At a very basic level, this should address why the collection needs to be preserved and what is needed in order to view the content. Making explicit what is worth the finite funds and energy to preserve not only serves as a tool in the present, but also explains decisions that have been made. Examples of priorities to consider are content, format, condition, potential research value, intellectual property rights, institutional mandate, collecting scope, and financial capabilities. And it's worth remembering that these can change over time. Based on these priorities, the plan should leverage the data captured through collection surveys and inventories into valuable and directed action. Not everything can be saved, but having agency determine what will and will not is empowering, and arming oneself with the data needed to make that decision is essential. So here are some decision points that need to be addressed. 3 major areas in the creation of a project plan that could potentially, if not followed closely, could create points of pain. Project management. Managing a project is often a full-time job. So it's important to identify who is responsible for specific tasks. This should be a person that has the ability to take on more work, not at the detriment of their other work. Managing a project requires strong communication and organizational skills to be sure that all the various details are shared and addressed. Inevitably, there will be unexpected things that will pop up. The project manager should be able to assess the situation and come up with a solution that best suits the project. Lastly, the project manager should be a strong collaborator and view themselves as the custodian of the project. Their role is to ensure that all the voices at the table are heard and to find a mutually beneficial road forward for the project. Project deliverables are similar to the outcomes, but they are more granular. They will be specific elements that you will need from the project in order to achieve your outcomes. The example project deliverables I have listed here are for digitization projects and are ones that we receive from a vendored project. File formats should be ones that work within your organization's systems while trying to follow good practice. For example, aim to get a preservation file that isn't compressed so that you aren't losing any information. Things like transcriptions are valuable since it allows many different people to access your collections regardless of their physical abilities. It can also make your collections more discoverable and increase the post-digitization use cases. And lastly, planning the life cycle. Aside from funding, it's important that the means to act include care and access for the digital assets after migration. Preservation is an ongoing cyclical process of care. Plan to care for the digital collections beyond keeping them on a server or hard drive kept on the office shelf. Looking to the community and regional cultural heritage groups can be the missing piece in the plan that provides this level of long-term care. Part of this is to plan for the end of your stewardship of the collection. This could mean that you have earmarked organizations that could carry on with the stewardship or returning them to the community from which they came. Having this plan doesn't necessarily mean that you will act it out. It's just part of being prepared, similar to that of a disaster plan. It's good to have around for that just in case moment. So next is outline the project plan. This should create a framework for the various stages and tasks with the person who is responsible for them. It is one document that lays bare all the various details of the specific project. In addition to being the compass for your project, it can also be used in the future to provide context for how decisions were made and why. It is important to remember that things may need to change slightly along the course of the project, but generally you want to stay as close to the plan as possible. Be sure to list out all the constraints, the things that limit what you're able to accomplish, and be specific. This not only helps keep expectations tied to reality, but it may also be used as an advocacy tool because you can clearly articulate how deficiencies impacted what you were able to accomplish. Include the deliverables we discussed on the previous slide with the explanation of how you came to decide upon them. Finally, the plan should include exclusions for what is not part of the project. This is a great way to keep your project from experiencing project creep. By listing what your project is not, you can keep it from becoming those things later on. Another example of keeping everyone's expectations tied to what is feasible. And lastly, we have the schedule. Having a clear and shared schedule makes explicit the plan of action and the accountability around the action, so the plan is grounded in logical timelines. When creating the schedule, be sure to include the people who will be doing the work so that everyone has an accurate understanding of what is required to complete a task. For the best chance of success, the schedule should identify any constraints that might impede the process. Where outside variables are involved, such as partners or vendors, they too should see the schedule so they understand the goals. The schedule is also where the institution can plan small pilot projects in order to find inefficiencies, bottlenecks, and redundancies. Once all these pieces are fit together in a project that resembles your needs, it's time to address funding. All of what I have spoken about requires some amount of money, whether that's through labor, expertise, digitization, supplies, physical space, and so on. So finding a source of funding is extremely important for the longevity of the collection. This last section will focus on avenues of funding. Without a doubt, caring for your collections costs money, but that doesn't mean you have to do it all on your own. There are many options for funding, whether it's for needs assessment, environmental storage, or digitization. Sometimes funding can come from advocating from within your own organization. The planning and description of your collection can be condensed into a rallying cry for an institution and assist in the recruitment of collaborators and can establish a precedence for care. However, when rallying inside of the institution isn't an option, we can look elsewhere. The cost of your needs may be impacted by a few elements. Volume. If you have lots of media to digitize, this can actually work to your advantage as vendors usually provide volume discounts on larger projects. The overall budget might be higher, but the unit price of media digitization will lower, allowing your preservation dollars to stretch much farther. I also recommend doing a pilot project. If at all possible, incorporate the pilot into a full project rather than its own smaller project. This way you can ensure that deliverables and processes are nailed down early in the project while also getting the lower unit price. Collaboration. But what if you don't have dozens or hundreds of objects to digitize? It doesn't seem like that's the case for this group, but let's say you only have a few pieces. This is a great time to reach out to other organizations to see if you can partner with them. If you're able to pool media with other organizations, you can still get a lower per item cost than sending out only a handful of your own items. Knowing what's in your collection can have a big impact on getting the necessary resources for digitization. It can help you identify grants to make entire collections available, or it can let researchers know what media you have, and they may be willing to pay in order to have media reformatted for access, giving your institution a copy of the files as well. Obviously, this will depend on your own institution's policies, but it's always good to have options. Lastly, we have crowdfunding, which is very popular in almost every other type of fundraising, which allows you to promote your fundraising initiatives on social media, while others can donate directly to the proposed project. My unit recently engaged in a crowdfunding campaign to purchase obsolete media equipment because our university spending guidelines prohibit us from purchasing from places like eBay because there is a fluctuating cost of these things. So we turned to crowdfunding to purchase these items at eBay. You should always see what organizations and consortiums your institution may already be a member of. Some organizations, such as Lyrasis, provide discounts on digitization services through their preferred vendors. So here are some specific grant opportunities, and I'm seeing the time. So rather than going through each of them and explaining them, I'm just going to go through them. I will be releasing the slides later, and you can kind of read the notes on these. And they are links for you to look at too. So some of these are specific to digitization. Some of them are more broadly about if you needed to pay for somebody to do the inventory, they can do that for you. And you'll see the bottom slide of this one is the Library of Michigan's Improving Access to Information Grant Program. Okay. So these are just some of the many grant funding opportunities available. So chances are there will be something out there to suit your collection's needs. And remember, you're not in this alone. There are organizations that can provide grant application assistance. And if you're applying for a grant that will be using vendored services, don't hesitate to ask them for input. Your vendor or potential vendor may have helped in writing many grant applications and can provide insight into what funding organizations are looking for. As I wrap up this webinar, I want to come back to our takeaways. The success of your project hinges on accurately identifying and describing the media in your collection, setting a clear scope for the project with agreed upon roles and outcomes, and finally, identifying your level of funding need and finding that through your networks. Here are some examples of resources, and I will open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, please feel free to either unmute yourselves or to drop questions in the chat. I will start off with a question, Sarah. What would you say is the most urgently in need of digitization audiovisual format out there?
Just on format alone,
Just
not
on
like
format alone, like
condition.
not condition, not anything like that. Just like if you had only the format you bought, what would you digitize this
That's
first?
tough. That's a tough question. For a while, I think everyone was saying like magnetic tape, right? Like magnetic tape was quickly like the thing. But there's a lot of different formats in magnetic tape. I think when I come across a collection that has open reel video, so that would be like 1-inch, 2-inch, EIAJ, like I immediately act on that. Like those are formats that not only are potentially deteriorating, but the machinery that it is required to play those back are like quickly becoming garbage. And so I would not sit on those formats.
Great, thanks. Well, actually, Arabeth it looks like just asked about one of those formats.
Yes.
Curious if others have worked with 2-inch quad tape and how they've gone about getting those digitized, as they are super expensive to get done. And as Sarah said, they're super expensive to get done because there's only a handful of machines in the world that can still digitize those.
Yeah. And so I think that's a broadcasting format. Like you don't, unless you had someone who was in broadcasting who then used them at home, which there were a couple people like that. You don't often find like home movies on 2-inch, right? So something you could look into is where did they come from? Is there a news affiliate or someone in your area that these are connected to, and maybe trying to approach them about like a funding opportunity there, right? Okay, so I see it's a broadcast collection, right? So it could be something where you talk to them about funding, or maybe this is a crowdfunded thing where the community has a vested interest in keeping this news preserved. And 2-inch is a great format, actually. It's like really high quality images. So it's going to be a beautiful image once you get it back, hopefully, unless it was not recorded well.
Also to say that AAPB, the American Association of Public Broadcasting, does offer, I'm pretty sure, some grant opportunities for digitizing broadcast collections. So I would recommend exploring that. If you have a large amount of that in your collection, they might be willing to partner with you and help, or maybe share some of the cost.
Yeah. And they're very familiar with digitizing that type of format. So they can even provide you with help in, like, at the very least, directing you towards things to avoid, things to do.
Definitely, they're very helpful. Great. Any other questions? I love AV. We can talk about AV all day.
It's my bread and butter.
Okay, okay. If people have questions, we'll be around for a few more minutes. Sarah, do you mind just going to your last slide? Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for this excellent presentation and covering so much wonderful content to get people started on how to approach digitizing their collections of audiovisual material. I do want to say thank you to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for making this webinar series possible, and to the Library of Michigan. And I hope that you will all join us for our next session, which is going to be in December, and it's called How to Pick Your Newspaper. It's about newspaper digitization in public libraries. So I will drop the link in the chat once I grab it. So I hope you will register and join us there. We're also going to drop in a link in the chat to the survey. Please take the time, it's only 3 questions, to provide feedback on this web series, and that will really help us in future programming. As always, you can feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can create programming around whatever you're interested in learning more about. Thank you so much, and we really look forward to seeing you. Thank you. And I'm going to stop the recording.